Something screamed where there should have been only wind and water. Claire froze on the narrow path, one hand on the strap of her daypack. The sound was thin and raw. It came in short bursts, stopped, then came again, like a chest trying and failing to rise. She left the trail. Brush scraped her legs and damp ferns slapped her calves. She stepped to the edge of a shallow bog. The cry lifted once more from across the dark surface. Silt slurped around something that moved. A small head, round ears, a muzzle slick with mud. A bear cub. Claire went still. One truth said danger. Where there is a cub, there may be a mother. Another truth said do not look away. The little body lurched and sank. The sound that came out of it was not big enough for the fear it carried. She scanned the trees for any sign of the sow. No heavy footfalls. No deep huff. The cub pawed at nothing and slid again. Claire set her pack down and spoke out loud, her voice low and steady, as if calming a skittish horse. She said that she would help. She said that she would move slow. She said it again for herself. The bog looked like a thin skin over breath. Claire backed up, found a dead spruce limb as long as her arms, and eased it across the surface like a bridge. The cub watched her with one eye that was not caked shut. Its chest heaved shallowly. Mud licked at its throat. Claire stepped onto the limb. It rocked under her weight and whispered as bark cracked. She crouched and slid one foot forward, then the other. Midway out she stopped and listened. The woods held steady. She could hear only her breath and the weak rasp from the cub. She was close enough now to see that one hind leg was trapped in roots under the mud. The cub tried to pull free and only drove itself deeper. Claire reached into the cool brown and found the roots with her fingers. They were tight and slick and stung where they scraped her skin. She slid her hand farther and felt fur and bone and the tremor of a living thing running out of strength. She needed leverage. Claire slid the limb ahead and wedged it under the trapped leg. The limb sank but caught. She pressed down, slow and steady. The root loosened a breath. The cub kicked and the limb slipped. Claire almost lost her balance and had to throw a hand to the mud to stay on the makeshift bridge. Cold seeped through her sleeve. She reset the limb and pressed again, talking the whole time in that flat, soothing voice she had used with fearful dogs at the shelter. The root gave. The trapped foot slid free. The cub lurched up and forward, and the limb shot loose. Claire slid with it and sank to her shin. She dug her free foot wider, found purchase, and gathered the cub against her with both arms. It was heavier than she expected. Mud coated its belly and ran in sheets off her jacket. The cub did not struggle. It made a small sound like a cough and went slack against her chest. Claire backed along the limb one slow step at a time, feeling for solid ground with her heels. The last step collapsed and she went down to one knee, but the bank held. She pulled herself and the cub onto firmer earth and lay there, gasping. She rolled to her side and set the cub on the grass. It flopped onto its ribs, breath fluttering too fast. She brushed mud from its nose with the cuff of her sleeve. Its eyes blinked. It made a low sound that was not a growl and not a whine. Claire lifted its chin to keep the airway open and waited for the next breath. It came, thin but there. Then another. The trees felt close. Claire looked up at the line where dark needles met pale sky and tried to read the silence. She called out in a level voice that she meant no harm. Nothing moved except the low grass. She told herself to do what she knew. Check warmth. Check breathing. Check for obvious injury. She peeled off her jacket, folded it into a cradle, and slid the cub onto that softer ground. The mud let go in sticky sheets. She wiped what she could with a bandana and found scrapes, but no open wounds. The hind leg would bear watching, but it was free. The cub coughed again and drew a longer breath as if something finally cleared. She glanced across the bog. If the sow was near, she would have come by now. That was what she told herself. She kept her movements slow. She poured a little water onto the bandana and cleaned more mud from the muzzle and eyes. The cub blinked and focused on her face. For a second, something passed between them. It felt like a simple bargain. She would stay. He would try to breathe. A breeze moved through the clearing. The cub shivered. Claire tucked the jacket around him and slid her pack under his shoulder to lift his chest. She had done that trick once for a dog at the shelter. Elevate. Warmth. Patience. Stay with me. She did not say the last part aloud, but it beat in her chest with each count of his breath. Minutes passed. The cub's breathing eased to a steadier rhythm. He tried to lift his head, and Claire steadied it with one hand. Easy, she said. You are safe for now. She was aware of every sound and of her own fear asking what happens next. She did not answer that question. Not yet. She sat with the small body and watched the rise and fall that mattered more than any plan. The light shifted, brighter between the branches. Somewhere far off, a truck rumbled along a road she could not see. Life went on while here time had narrowed to the space of a jacket and a breath. When the cub finally rolled onto his belly and tucked his legs under him, Claire felt a relief so sharp it was almost pain. He could not stand yet. He tried and slid and put his head down again, spent. She looked toward the tree line and felt the old fear step forward. If the sow arrived now, would she trust what she saw? A human crouched over her young. A jacket wrapped around a body that smelled of mud and sweat. Claire kept her hands open and low. She spoke into the trees in the same steady voice. "He is alive. I will back away if you come. I will not touch him then." The words steadied her. She packed the bandana, gathered the pack straps, and prepared to move back to give space. The cub's breathing faltered once more and then caught. He made that small cough and leaned into the warmth of the jacket. Claire stopped moving. She understood the work was not finished just because the mud had let him go. Rescue is a bridge, not a shore. She stayed where she was, knees soaked, fingers numb, heart steadying to match the small chest beside her, and knew that everything after this would ask for more. The woods held their breath too. Claire tried to lift the cub again. His body was heavier now that the mud had drained off, but it was still more than she could carry far. She pulled the jacket tighter around him and slid her arms under his chest. He wheezed when she moved him, a sound that pressed her heart. She whispered that he would be all right, though she had no proof. The path back to the road stretched longer than she remembered. Roots lifted through the soil, and her boots slipped on damp moss. She managed 10 steps before her shoulders burned. The cub coughed weakly and shifted against her grip. Claire stopped, breathed, and adjusted him across her arms like a child carried from sleep. Her car was still nearly half a mile away. That distance felt like another world. She lowered herself to her knees and let the cub rest on her pack for a moment. He blinked and made a soft sound, a thread of trust. His paw touched her sleeve and stayed there, claws curled but not digging. That simple gesture struck her harder than the weight. She stood again, dragging him across her lap to balance the load. The forest gave no answer. Only chickadees and the faint trickle of water from the bog. Claire carried forward, step by hard step, until her arms trembled. She shifted, sat on a stump, and let him rest once more. She rubbed the fur on his neck with muddy hands. His eyes closed for a beat, then opened with effort, always finding her face. It was late afternoon when she reached the car. The small hatchback looked fragile against the trees. She laid the cub onto a blanket from the trunk. The interior filled quickly with the smell of mud and damp fur. She started the engine and the hum startled him. He twitched, then pressed into the blanket, eyes wide. Claire murmured that it was safe. She drove slow, each bump carrying a fear she could make things worse. Home was 15 minutes away, but the drive stretched longer. She kept one hand near the cub, feeling each shallow breath. He shifted once, lifting his paw onto her wrist. She held steady, eyes on the road, heart on that small weight of trust. When she reached her cabin, the light was fading. The porch boards creaked as she carried the cub inside. She set him gently onto an old rug near the wood stove. The house smelled of pine and dust. She lit the fire with shaking hands, coaxing warmth into the room. The cub lay still, sides fluttering. She fetched warm water and a clean towel. Kneeling, she wiped mud from his legs and belly. Scrapes showed, but nothing deeper. He winced when she touched the hind leg. She slowed, speaking quietly. She remembered the dogs she had once cared for, how they calmed at the sound of steady breath. She tried to give him the same. Her own fear pressed in. She thought of the wild order of things. A cub belongs to his mother. By lifting him from the bog, she may have broken a chain nature intended. Was she saving him or stealing him from his place? She shook the thought away and kept wiping mud until his fur lay cleaner and softer. She brought water in a shallow bowl. He sniffed but did not drink. She dipped her fingers and let drops fall near his mouth. He licked weakly, then turned his head. Claire left the bowl within reach. She laid her jacket over him again and folded another blanket on top. The room grew warmer. Fire popped in the stove. Claire sat with her back against the wall, legs stretched beside the cub. She counted breaths. They came faster than she liked, but steadier than in the bog. When he shifted closer, his paw pressed against her hand again. She did not move away. Hours passed. Night crept against the windows. Claire dozed, waking each time the cub stirred. She checked his chest, adjusted the blanket, whispered steady words. The world outside pressed close, silent except for the wind. At one point, a distant sound broke the quiet. A low, rolling note that lifted the hair at her neck. A bear's call. Not far. She froze, listening. The cub raised his head weakly, ears twitching. He gave a small reply, more whimper than roar, but enough. Claire's stomach turned. The mother might be near. She sat rigid by the fire, listening as the sound faded, wondering if dawn would bring a knock of claws on her door. Claire sat with her back against the wall, staring into the fire that had burned low, the embers glowing faintly and snapping with every gust that sneaked in through the cracks of the cabin. The cub shifted under the blanket, breathing steady but shallow, the sound so fragile that she leaned forward often, making sure it did not stop. Her mind replayed the sound from the woods again and again. That low call had not been the wind. It was too deep, too full of purpose. It had been a mother searching. She pictured the bear moving through the dark trees, nose to the ground, driven by the absence of her young. Every step a mixture of rage, worry, and instinct. By dawn, Claire knew the choice pressed closer, heavier than any weight she had carried the day before. The cub belonged out there, under branches and open skies, not on a human's rug before a fire. Yet he lay weak, hardly able to lift his head. She poured fresh water, brought it close, and he licked a little before curling tighter into himself. His eyes blinked open once, reflecting the flames, and then closed again. He tried to stand, legs trembling so hard that his claws scraped the floor, then collapsed against the blanket. Claire's heart folded with the sight. It was unnatural to see such a wild creature so helpless, depending fully on her. She stepped outside to breathe clear air and gather her thoughts. The forest smelled of pine, wet soil, and the faint sweetness of early blossoms. Every bird call made her scan the trees for movement, as though the next shadow might be the mother stepping out. The thought grew louder with each passing minute. If she kept the cub here, she might doom him to a slow end. If she carried him back, she might face the mother and not walk away. Either way, the risk would be hers alone. She walked around the cabin, looking at the thin line of smoke rising into pale morning sky. The normalcy of it hurt. Breakfast sat uneaten on the counter inside, the coffee cold. But she could not pretend the world had not shifted. That cub on her rug was not hers to save or keep. He was a piece of the wild, and she stood between him and where he needed to be. By afternoon, she had decided. The cub stirred when she lifted him again, his paw hooking on her sleeve like before. That weak but deliberate gesture pulled her forward. She wrapped him carefully in the blanket, tucked him to her chest, and stepped from the cabin toward the line of trees. Each step away from the safety of walls and fire felt final, as though she was leaving behind something she would never get back. The trail was softer now with spring melt, mud sucking at her boots with each step. She carried slow, pausing to rest the cub on her knee, then lifting again. His weight dragged on her shoulders, and his breathing against her collar rattled with small coughs. At times he only pressed closer, curling his paw against her jacket. Claire whispered steady words, almost like prayers, both for him and for herself. Almost there. Just a little more. Don't give up now. She stopped at a clearing she knew, not far from the bog where she had found him the day before. Tall spruce formed a ring, a natural shelter. The ground here was soft with old needles and patches of moss. She set the cub down gently on the blanket and knelt beside him. His head turned immediately toward the deeper woods. His nose twitched, catching scents she could not detect. His body quivered with effort as he tried to push up onto his legs, stumbled, then looked at her with wide, wet eyes that seemed to ask for permission. Claire's chest tightened until she had to press her hand against it. She stroked his back with her other hand and spoke low, her voice trembling. "You will not be alone. You are almost home." She pulled back a step to give him space, but not too far, torn between protecting him and letting go. The woods answered with a crack of a branch. Sharp and sudden, she froze, her eyes darting across the line of trees. The cub's ears pricked forward, his body stiff despite weakness. Another crack, closer this time, deliberate, not the wind. Claire's breath caught. Her heart pounded so loud it felt as though the forest must hear it. She scanned the shadows between trunks, shapes seeming to move, then vanish again. The sunlight filtered in broken shafts, painting illusions that fed her fear. Her breath quickened, and sweat prickled under her collar despite the cool air. She backed another step, hands hovering as though she might need to grab the cub again and run. But she knew she could not outrun what was coming. The cub tried once more to rise, wobbling on unsteady legs, gaze fixed on the trees. His mouth opened with a faint cry, thin but clear. The sound carried farther than she expected, slicing through the silence. It was not just a call, it was a plea. The forest went still. Birds hushed. The wind itself seemed to pause. Then a heavy thud rolled across the ground, followed by another. The earth trembled under each step. Claire's skin chilled to her bones. She stayed crouched, hands open at her sides, heart hammering faster than thought. She did not know if she should run, shout, or hold still. Her body begged her to flee, but her reason told her that flight would mean the end. The cub's cry came again, weaker but still enough. From the darkness between trunks, a shadow slipped forward. Massive shoulders swayed, dark fur catching the dim light, eyes glinting with something both fierce and focused. The air filled with the musk of bear, raw and ancient. The mother had come. Claire stayed rooted, every nerve alive with fear. Her lips moved before her mind caught up, whispering to herself not to move, not to make a sound. The cub dragged himself a little closer to the edge of the blanket, eyes locked on that enormous shape. Claire could only watch, helpless, as the presence stepped forward, silent but certain, filling the space with a weight that pressed against her chest and stole her breath. The moment stretched into something endless, each breath a question with no clear answer. She realized, in the blur of fear and awe, that she had done all she could. She had carried him back. She had given him the chance. The rest would not be hers to decide. The forest would decide, and the mother would decide. And in that surrender, she found both terror and the faintest thread of peace. The shape grew clearer with each heavy step. Claire's knees pressed into the damp needles, her hands spread on the ground to show she held nothing. The mother bear moved from shadow into light, massive head swinging, nostrils flaring. Her fur rippled with each shift of muscle. The cub made another weak sound and struggled toward her. The sow stopped just beyond the blanket. She lowered her muzzle, drawing in the scent. Her breath came loud and hot, carrying earth and musk. Claire felt the heat, even from her crouch. The bear's eyes lifted, fixing on her. Time collapsed into that gaze. She whispered, steady as she could, that she meant no harm. The cub stretched a paw toward the mother, claws scraping the blanket. His body trembled with the effort. The sow leaned down, sniffed his face, then nudged him gently with her muzzle. A low rumble rolled from her chest. Not anger, but something older. A call answered in the cub's small whine. He pressed against her leg, too weak to stand, but reaching. Claire held still, heart hammering. Every part of her screamed to step back, but she stayed. The sow shifted her gaze once more to Claire. For a breath, the air balanced on a blade. Attack or allowance. Fear or release. Claire did not move. She lowered her head slightly, as if in surrender, palms still open. The mother bent again, grasped the scruff of the cub's neck with powerful jaws, and lifted him clear of the blanket. He dangled limp but alive, eyes blinking. Claire let out a breath she had not known she held. The sow turned, cub secure, and started toward the trees. Claire rose slowly to her feet, legs shaking. She did not follow. She watched as the great body moved back into shadow, each step steady, weight sure. Branches parted and closed behind them. The sound of snapping twigs faded. Only silence returned, layered with the faint rustle of wind. She stood alone in the clearing, the blanket still spread, marked by mud and paw prints. Her arms ached from where she had carried him, her chest hollow with release. She tried to picture what would come next. Would the cub survive the night, the week, the season? She could not know. That not knowing held its own weight. Claire knelt and gathered the blanket, folding it with care though it was caked with mud. She held it close, as if it still carried his warmth. Her breath shook. She had acted, crossed lines between wild and human, and now she bore the question of whether it had been right. The sun had slipped lower, painting the sky in soft gold. She walked back toward the trail, each step heavier with the silence the bear left behind. Her cabin waited, the fire likely gone cold. Life would return to its patterns: work, errands, days marked by ordinary things. Yet something had shifted. She had seen into that thin space where survival balanced, where her hands carried another life for a time. As she reached the road, Claire looked once more toward the line of trees. She whispered goodbye, though no one heard but the wind. She turned and kept walking, carrying the weight of what she had done and the mystery of what she would never know.